Every American senior living alone knows the same quiet truth. A 5-pound bag of potatoes costs almost nothing and can carry you through a whole week of warm, filling suppers. The potato was the meal that never let a family go hungry. Cheap, filling, gentle on older teeth, and endlessly forgiving. A senior could turn one potato into a hot supper in minutes, with almost nothing else in the house. It built a whole quiet tradition of eating well alone on a fixed income, one humble potato dinner at a time. If you have ever cooked for just yourself at the end of a long day, you already know these meals. These are 25 forgotten potato dinners for seniors living alone that cost pennies. Subscribe before we begin. The countdown starts now. Fried potatoes and onions. The humble supper of potatoes and onions, fried slow in grease until crisp, golden, and sweet. A whole meal for pocket change. Potatoes cost 20 cents for 5 pounds in 1972. Today, around $3. Onion and grease. Total then under 30 cents. Today, under $4. Fed one for 2 meals. You slice potatoes and onion thin. You fry them slow in hot grease until the edges go crisp and golden and the onion turns sweet. The potatoes go crisp and brown. The onion sweetens. The grease flavors every bite. Fried potatoes and onions came from universal poverty cooking. By 1972, they were a senior's go-to supper nationwide. Potatoes and onions fried crisp, a filling supper for pennies. Baked potato with butter. The simplest supper there is, a whole potato baked until fluffy and split open with butter, salt, and pepper. A potato cost a few cents in 1973, butter and salt. Total then under 15 cents. Today, under $1. Fed one. You bake a potato until the skin crisps and the inside goes fluffy. You split it open and load it with butter, salt, and pepper. The skin goes crisp. The inside goes fluffy and soft. The butter melts through. The baked potato came from universal home cooking. By 1973, it was a senior's easy supper nationwide. A baked potato with butter, supper with almost no effort. Potato soup. The thick, creamy soup that turned a few potatoes into a warming pot of supper. Potatoes cost 20 cents for 5 pounds in 1972. Today, around $3. Milk, butter, and onion. Total then under 50 cents. Today, under $5. Fed one for several days. You simmer diced potatoes with onion until soft. You add milk, butter, and a flour slurry to thicken. The soup goes thick and creamy. The potatoes break down. The whole pot is warm and gentle. Potato soup came from Irish and Eastern European thrift cooking. By 1972, it was a senior's comfort supper nationwide. A few potatoes turned into a creamy pot of comfort. Mashed potatoes and gravy. The soft, comforting supper of mashed potatoes, topped with a simple milk or drippings gravy. Potatoes cost a few cents in 1973. Milk, butter, and flour. Total then under 30 cents. Today, under $3. Fed one. You boil potatoes until soft and mash them with butter and milk. You make a quick gravy and pour it over. The mash goes soft and creamy. The gravy pools on top. It needs no chewing at all. Mashed potatoes and gravy came from universal home cooking. By 1973, it was a senior's gentle supper nationwide. Soft mashed potatoes and gravy, gentle comfort for one. Potato pancakes. The crisp, golden cakes made from grated or leftover potato fried until brown and eaten with applesauce or sour cream. Potatoes cost a few cents in 1972. An egg, flour, and grease. Total then under 20 cents. Today, under $2. Fed 1. You grate potato and mix with egg and flour. You fry spoonfuls in grease until golden and crisp on both sides. The outside goes crisp and brown. The inside stays soft. The applesauce cools it. Potato pancakes came from German, Jewish, and Eastern European traditions. By 1972, they were a senior supper nationwide. Crispy potato pancakes, a supper from a couple of spuds. Cheesy potato bake. The warm supper that layered sliced potatoes with cheese and milk, baked until bubbling and golden. Potatoes cost a few cents in 1973. Cheese, milk, and butter. Total then under 50 cents. Today, under $4. Fed 1 for 2 meals. You layer sliced potatoes with cheese and milk in a small dish. You bake until the potatoes go tender and the top browns. The potatoes go creamy. The cheese melts through. The top goes golden and bubbling. Cheesy potato bake came from American and Midwestern home cooking. By 1973, it was a senior's comfort supper nationwide. Potatoes baked with cheese. A warm supper for one. Cooking for one is its own quiet art. A few potatoes in a warm pan turn a solitary evening into a real supper. And that matters more than anyone says.
Potato and egg skillet. The supper that fried diced potatoes with a couple of eggs scrambled in. A full meal from the 2 cheapest things in the kitchen. Potatoes cost a few cents in 1972. Eggs, onion, and grease. Total then under 30 cents. Today, under $3. Fed 1. You fry diced potato with onion until golden. You crack eggs over the top and scramble them in. The potatoes go crisp. The eggs go soft. The onion sweetens everything. Potato and egg skillet came from universal thrift cooking. By 1972, it was a senior's supper nationwide. Potatoes and eggs in one pan, a full supper for pennies. Scalloped potatoes. The creamy baked supper of thin potatoes layered in a milk sauce until tender and golden. Potatoes cost a few cents in 1973. Milk, butter, flour, and onion. Total then under 40 cents. Today, under $4. Fed 1 for 2 meals. You layer thin potatoes with a milk sauce and onion. You bake until the potatoes go tender and the top browns. The potatoes go creamy and soft. The sauce thickens. The top goes golden. Scalloped potatoes came from English and American home cooking. By 1973, it was a senior's comfort supper nationwide. Creamy layered potatoes, a soft baked supper for one. Potato and cabbage fry. The one-pan supper that fried potato and cabbage together in butter until soft and sweet. Potatoes and cabbage cost a few cents in 1972. Butter and onion. Total then under 30 cents. Today, under $4. Fed 1. You fry diced potato until golden. You add shredded cabbage and onion. You cook until everything goes soft and sweet. The potato goes crisp. The cabbage goes sweet. The butter enriches it all. Potato and cabbage fry came from Irish and German thrift cooking. By 1972, it was a senior's supper nationwide. Potato and cabbage fried together, a filling supper for one. Potato hash. The skillet hash of diced potatoes browned crisp with onion and a little leftover meat. Potatoes cost a few cents in 1973. Onion, a little meat, and grease. Total then under 40 cents. Today, under $4. Fed 1. You fry diced potato until crisp. You add onion and any leftover meat. You press it flat and crisp the bottom. The potatoes go crisp and golden. The bottom crust forms. The meat flavors it. Potato hash came from New England thrift cooking. By 1973, it was a senior's supper nationwide. A crisp potato hash, a hearty supper from leftovers. Colcannon. The Irish supper that mashed potatoes together with cabbage or kale and plenty of butter. Potatoes and greens cost a few cents in 1972. Butter, milk, and onion. Total then under 30 cents. Today under $4. Fed 1 for 2 meals. You boil potatoes and greens. You mash them together with butter, milk, and onion. The mash goes soft and green-flecked. The butter melts through. It is gentle and filling. Colcannon came from Irish home cooking. By 1972, it was a senior's supper in Irish-American homes. Mashed potato and greens, a soft Irish supper for one. Potato cakes. The supper that pan-fried leftover mashed potato into golden cakes, crisp outside and soft within. Leftover mashed potato cost nothing in 1973. Flour, egg, and grease. Total then under 20 cents. Today under $2. Fed 1. You mix leftover mashed potato with flour and egg. You shape cakes and fry them golden. The outside goes crisp. The inside stays soft. They fry up golden. Potato cakes came from Irish and Southern thrift cooking. By 1973, they were a senior's leftover rescue supper nationwide. Leftover mash fried into golden cakes, supper for pennies. You set the table for one. You light the kitchen against the quiet. And a warm potato supper made just for you is a small but real act of caring for yourself. Potato and sausage skillet. The one-pan supper that browned a little sausage with potatoes and onion into a hearty dish. Potatoes cost a few cents in 1972. A little sausage and onion. Total then under 50 cents. Today under $5. Fed 1. You brown a little sausage. You add diced potato and onion. You fry until the potatoes go crisp and golden. The sausage goes savory. The potatoes go crisp. The onion sweetens it. Potato and sausage skillet came from German and Polish thrift cooking. By 1972, it was a senior's supper nationwide. Potatoes and sausage in one pan, a hearty supper for one. Creamed potatoes on toast. The gentle supper that folded diced potatoes into a cream sauce and spooned them over toast. Potatoes cost a few cents in 1973. Milk, butter, flour, and bread. Total then under 30 cents. Today under $3. Fed 1. You dice and boil potatoes. You make a cream sauce and fold them in. You spoon it over toast. The sauce goes creamy. The potatoes go soft. The toast soaks it up. Creamed potatoes on toast came from Appalachian and Midwestern thrift cooking. By 1973, it was a senior's gentle supper. Creamed potatoes over toast, soft comfort for one. Potato dumplings. The Eastern European dumplings made from grated potato, boiled soft and tossed in butter. Potatoes cost a few cents in 1972. Flour, egg, and butter. Total then under 30 cents. Today, under $4. Fed 1 for 2 meals. You grate potato and mix with flour and egg. You shape balls and boil until they float. You toss in butter. The dumplings go soft and tender. The butter coats them. They fill you up. Potato dumplings came from German, Polish, and Czech traditions. By 1972, they were a senior's supper nationwide. Soft potato dumplings, a filling supper for one. Baked potato soup. The thick, creamy soup made from a baked potato, mashed with milk and cheese. A potato cost a few cents in 1973. Milk, butter, and cheese. Total then, under 40 cents. Today, under $4. Fed one. You bake a potato and mash it into warm milk with butter and cheese until creamy. The soup goes thick and creamy. The cheese melts through. It warms you fast. Baked potato soup came from American home cooking. By 1973, it was a senior's comfort supper nationwide. A creamy baked potato soup. Comfort in one bowl. Potato and leek soup. The gentle soup that simmered potatoes with sweet leeks into a smooth, mild supper. Potatoes and a leek cost a few cents in 1972. Butter and milk. Total then, under 40 cents. Today, under $4. Fed one for 2 meals. You simmer potatoes and sliced leek in butter until soft. You add milk and mash lightly. The soup goes smooth and mild. The leek adds sweetness. The potatoes thicken it. Potato and leek soup came from French and British home cooking. By 1972, it was a senior supper nationwide. Potato and leek soup, a smooth and gentle supper. That single potato supper carries something quiet and strong. The daily choice to make even a meal for one, a real meal, worth sitting down to. Twice baked potato. The supper that baked a potato, scooped out the inside, mixed it with cheese, and baked it again. A potato cost a few cents in 1973. Cheese, butter, and milk. Total then, under 40 cents. Today, under $4. Fed one. You bake a potato and scoop out the flesh. You mash it with cheese and butter and pack it back in. You bake it again until golden. The filling goes creamy and cheesy. The skin crisps. The top browns. Twice baked potatoes came from American home cooking. By 1973, they were a senior's comfort supper nationwide. A twice baked potato. A rich supper for one. Potato and bacon skillet. The one-pan supper that fried potatoes with crisp bacon and onion. Potatoes cost a few cents in 1972. Bacon and onion. Total then, under 50 cents. Today, under $5. Fed one. You crisp bacon and fry diced potato in the grease with onion until golden. The bacon goes crisp. The potatoes brown in the fat. The onion sweetens it. Potato and bacon skillet came from universal thrift cooking. By 1972, it was a senior supper nationwide. Potatoes and bacon in one pan. A savory supper for one. Boiled potatoes with butter and herbs. The simplest supper of tender boiled potatoes, tossed in butter with a little parsley. Potatoes cost a few cents in 1973. Butter and parsley. Total then, under 20 cents. Today, under $2. Fed one. You boil small potatoes until tender. You toss them in butter with parsley, salt, and pepper. The potatoes go soft. The butter coats them. The parsley brightens them. Boiled potatoes with butter came from universal home cooking. By 1973, it was a senior's easy supper nationwide. Buttered boiled potatoes. A simple supper for one. Potato curry. The mild curry that simmered potatoes in a savory sauce over rice or with bread. Potatoes cost a few cents in 1972. onion, curry powder, and rice. Total then under 30 cents. Today, under $4. Fed one for 2 meals. You cook onion with curry powder. You add diced potato and a little water. You simmer until tender. The potatoes go soft. The sauce goes savory and warm. The curry adds gentle spice. Potato curry came from American interpretations of Indian cooking. By 1972, it was a senior's adventurous supper. Potatoes in mild curry, a warming supper for one. Shepherd's potato topped bake. The supper that topped a little seasoned meat with mashed potato and baked it golden. Potatoes cost a few cents in 1973. A little ground meat and onion. Total then under 60 cents. Today, under $5. Fed one for 2 meals. You brown a little meat with onion. You top it with mashed potato. You bake until the top goes golden. The meat goes savory. The potato topping crisps. The 2 layers come together. The potato-topped bake came from British and Irish home cooking. By 1973, it was a senior's comfort supper nationwide. Meat topped with mashed potato. A hearty supper for one.
Potato and cheese pierogi. The Polish dumplings filled with cheesy mashed potato, boiled and fried in butter. Potatoes cost a few cents in 1972. Flour, egg, and cheese. Total then under 50 cents. Today, under $5. Fed one for 2 meals. You fill dough with cheesy mashed potato. You boil the pierogi, then fry them in butter and onion. The dough goes tender. The filling stays creamy. The butter crisps the edges. Pierogi came from Polish and Eastern European traditions. By 1972, they were a senior's supper in immigrant homes. Cheesy potato pierogi, a comforting supper for one. Potato and corn chowder. The thick, hearty soup that simmered potatoes with corn and milk into a filling one-bowl supper. Potatoes cost a few cents in 1972. Corn, milk, and onion. Total then under 40 cents. Today, under $4. Fed one for 2 meals. You simmer diced potato with onion until soft. You add corn and milk and thicken lightly. The soup goes thick and creamy. The corn stays sweet. The potatoes break down and thicken it. Potato and corn chowder came from New England and Midwestern thrift cooking. By 1972, it was a senior's supper nationwide. Potato and corn chowder, a hearty bowl for one. Potato omelet. The Spanish-style supper that folded soft potato slices into a thick, filling egg omelet. Potatoes cost a few cents in 1973. Eggs, onion, and grease. Total then under 30 cents. Today under $3. Fed one. You fry sliced potato and onion until soft. You pour beaten eggs over and cook until set. You fold it. The omelet goes golden. The potatoes fill it. The eggs hold it together. Potato omelet came from Spanish tortilla tradition adapted in America. By 1973, it was a senior's filling supper. A potato omelet, a hearty supper from eggs and spuds. Potato and ham bake. The one-dish supper that baked sliced potatoes with a little ham and a creamy sauce. Potatoes cost a few cents in 1972. A little ham, milk, and onion. Total then under 50 cents. Today, under $5. Fed one for 2 meals. You layer sliced potato and ham with a milk sauce. You bake until the potatoes go tender and the top browns. The potatoes go creamy. The ham goes salty and soft. The top goes golden. Potato and ham bake came from American and Midwestern home cooking. By 1972, it was a senior's supper nationwide. Potatoes baked with ham, a filling supper for one. Potato griddle cakes. The supper that fried a thin potato batter into crisp griddle cakes served with butter. Potatoes cost a few cents in 1973. Flour, egg, and grease. Total then under 20 cents. Today under $2. Fed 1. You grate potato into a thin batter with flour and egg. You fry spoonfuls on a griddle until crisp and golden. The cakes go crisp and lacy. The edges brown. The butter melts on top. Potato griddle cakes came from Appalachian and immigrant thrift cooking. By 1973, they were a senior's supper nationwide. Crisp potato griddle cakes, a supper for pennies. Potato and white bean stew. The one-pot stew that simmered potatoes with white beans into a thick, filling supper. Potatoes cost a few cents in 1972. White beans, onion, and broth. Total then under 40 cents. Today, under $4. Fed 1 for several days. You simmer potatoes and white beans with onion in broth until both go tender and creamy. The potatoes go soft. The beans thicken the broth. The whole pot is hearty and filling. Potato and white bean stew came from Southern and immigrant thrift cooking. By 1972, it was a senior's supper nationwide. Potatoes and white beans stewed together. A hearty pot for one.